A CBI special court has today remanded Chanda Kocchar and Deepak Kochhar as well as Venugopal Dhoot to 3 days of custody. They will be in remand till the 28th of December. Now, behind this headline is a really large and shocking story. One that has shocked not only the banking circles in this country, corporate India, but has underlined a story of fall from grace. To talk about Chanda Kocchar and Venugopal Dhoot, one has to first put into perspective what a big deal they were. Chanda Kocchar is a recipient of the Padma Bhushan in 2011. She is a woman who has inspired many by shattering glass ceilings. She was the MD and CEO of ICICI Bank, rising through the ranks from a trainee to the top position. Venugopal Dhoot and Videocon industries in the 90s were synonymous with all the white goods we all use before the Korean giants took over. So TVs, refrigerators, air conditioners, it was all Videocon. So what exactly happened? And why have these people now been arrested 4 years after the first charge sheets were filed? What does it tell us about the banking industry, the whole NPA mess which is still being solved, and of course corporate governance? We're going to be talking about that on the show in this deep dive today. But first, let me go across to my colleague Bhavtosh, who's giving us the latest details from the hearing today.
Well, as far as the case is concerned, remember this case, Shreya, was filed way back in January 2019, and all of three were questioned by the CBI. The arrest is something that has surprised everyone. It has taken nearly 4 years for the CBI to arrest Chanda Kocchar and Deepak Kochhar. And early this morning, when Venugopal Dhoot was called in by the CBI at its office in Bandra Kurla complex, he was immediately arrested by the agency. The CBI has said that the reason why Venugopal Dhoot has been arrested is the fact that he's a bribe giver. 64 crore rupees was transferred from a company called Supreme Energy Private Limited to New Renewable Private Limited, and this happened as soon as 300 crore rupees loan was sanctioned by Chanda Kocchar in 2009. This loan that was transferred, according to CBI, was done despite certain objection being raised by other members of the steering committee. CBI said that as soon as this loan was transferred, within 15 to 20 days, 64 crore rupees was given to New Renewable Energy Private Limited, a company that was fronted by Deepak Kochhar. The investigation that was earlier done by the Enforcement Directorate had said this was nothing but proceeds of crime. There is another angle to this entire investigation. They had said that the Kochhars were staying in a house which actually belonged to Venugopal Dhoot. The value of that house was worth 5.5 crore rupees, whereas the trust that purchased that house later had purchased it only for 11 lakh rupees. Now, these are the broad allegations against the Kochhars, and Venugopal Dhoot has been arrested primarily because of the fact that he had given a gratification worth 64 crore rupees. Deepak Kochhar was arrested way back in September 2020 by the Enforcement Directorate. He remained in the custody of the agency for 14 days and then subsequently managed to get bail in March 2021. Now, the Venugopal Dhoot was questioned last month by the Enforcement Directorate for at least on 4 occasions. Both Deepak Kochhar as well as Chanda Kocchar were called in for questioning last Friday by the CBI here in New Delhi and then placed under arrest.
All right, now to understand what the implications of the story is and these arrests are, I'm joined now by Tamal Bandyopadhyay and Hemendra Hazari. Truly, I cannot think of more detailed experts to explain the story, people who've tracked this sector very, very closely and seen the rise of Chanda Kocchar. Tamal, sir, let me come to you first. I tried to give a little bit of context of what it means for a Chanda Kocchar to see this kind of fall from grace. But do you think the biggest question today is the lens on how loans are disbursed and the fiduciary responsibility of the CEO and MD?
Thanks, Tamanna. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new about it. I mean, the only surprise is why now? Because CBI got into action in January 2018, if I'm not mistaken, and then the FIR was filed in early 2019. So almost 3 years later, why this arrest? Has any new information this investigative agency has come across? Otherwise, that the triangle or the quid pro quo that we have been talking about, and this videocon, Chanda Kocchar and her husband, this alleges nexus, etc. These are all in public domain. If you see, it started with that Infra Live magazine carried Kochhar's renewable empire, 15 July 2016. That's how it started. And then, I mean, nobody has picked up that story. And if you found, you will not find that story anymore in Infra Live. And then 2018, another whistleblower, did this, spoke about this nexus, and that's how everything came up. And then the board went out of its way to protect the lady. But unfortunately, that didn't, there's no way escape for her, because the Sri Krishna committee, which was constituted, it found that a lot of alleged irregularities, and because of that, she had to go. She did put in a paper, but she was sacked, and she did challenge it in Bombay High Court, but there's no respite for her. So there's a clawback for her bonus and ESOPs, etc., etc. So the point I am making is this: I don't know why there is a shock. I think there is no shock. It's a question of surprise that what happened, why this investigative agency, why has it taken so long? I mean, is there some new evidence, some new information that it has come across? And another point to make is this: if you look at the history, our investigative agencies, when it comes to the banking sector, I think their investigation is not exactly immaculate, because many of the bankers have been arrested in the past. They are even sent to jail, Arthur Road jail, and they had to spend nights with the hardcore criminals. But ultimately, how many of them actually, in how many cases these investigative agencies have been able to take them to the logical conclusion?
So that's a good question, because right now we're talking about the fall from grace. They're hitting the headlines. They have, been sent to police custody. The Kochhar's lawyer comes and says in court, why 4 years later, just a few days before their son's wedding, etc., etc. But at the core of this is the discretion used to grant loans in an era when NPAs were rife, and the connection thereof. Hemendra Hazari, your take on this. Chanda Kocchar has always maintained that she was not necessarily the sole decision maker. Committees decide which companies to give loans to. So they gave loans to Venugopal Dhoot's companies, to Videocon group companies. They went bad. So did many other loans given to many other corporates. Meanwhile, Venugopal Dhoot's investments in Chanda Kochar's husband's companies have nothing to do with each other, is their claim. Chanda Kochar's husband very famously goes and says that just because my wife is the CEO of ICICI Bank, am I not supposed to work? Am I supposed to sit at home? Do you think any of this can fly today?
No, it would not have flown then. It does not fly now, because the central and the main issue was conflict of interest. When Chanda Kocchar was on that panel, on that committee of ICICI Bank, which finally evaluated the loan to Videocon and then disbursed it, it is apparent to me that she did not disclose that there was a conflict of interest in giving that loan when her own husband has had business dealings with Videocon. See, no one is saying that he should not, as a spouse, he should not have anything to do with Videocon. The issue here was that she should have disclosed that there was a conflict of interest there, and she should have recused herself from that meeting, with both things which she has apparently not done. And it is because of that that she has now been caught. It was complete arrogance of power that she thought that she could sit on this committee, disperse the loan, and not disclose to the committee members that there was a conflict of interest. And sadly, that where she has slipped up is where she has been caught, because thereafter, further investigations have shown that there has been a payment from Videocon into her spouse's company. So that now has to be investigated, because the allegation is that is the kickback for giving the loan. If she had recused herself from that meeting and said there was a conflict of interest, her personal involvement would not have been questioned, because then it would have been a committee decision. So I think she played her cards very, very poorly, And this is the arrogance you'll find at the higher echelons of power in any institution, and definitely in ICICI Bank.
You know, Hemendra Hazare, the question of conflict of interest arises, of course, because she did not recuse herself. But I want to understand from the point of process the statement from Chanda Kochar's lawyers saying that there are many people who decide in the banking system who gets a loan. There are checks and balances which cannot allow this kind of a conflict of interest to go through or someone to push through a loan that they want. Is that truly existent? And have those loopholes been tightened since this entire situation came to light?
See how the system works in reality, and this is even in the case of the public sector banks, is that the CEO appoints the head of credit. Normally, you will find that whenever a new CEO takes over, and that you see this more regular in PSU banks, one of the first new changes you will find that he will replace the GM, the general manager of credit, because that's such a critical post. So how the system works in reality is the CEO will keep himself distant officially, but he will give the instructions to the various key committee members, and they will just implement that in the committee. Now, if Chanda Kocchar had done this officially, he could not trace anything back to her. But here again, you see, this is the way the actual system works, and I'm sure the system works the same in the private sector, that you don't see yourself to be officially involved, but since you appoint the key people and you are to give them their appraisal performance at the end of the year and the increments and the bonus, the authority is very clear that you have to follow whatever the CEO says or you leave the company. So most of the time, these senior officials, they just follow what the CEO says. Now, there are cases then when the thing erupts, so they get caught. But in reality, the CEO really is the master puppeteer in such cases. So he does not get his hands or her hands dirty, but he will get his key officials' hands dirty in this way.
Tamal, just on that point, is there, you talked about the difficulty in conviction. The fact that the CBI has waited 4 years, and for the first time, Venugopal Dhoot has also been arrested. Do you think there has been more to this case which has perhaps now been discovered? And is there any way that they may slip through the cracks as well, the Kochhars and Mr. Dhoot?
Well, I would like to believe that there is new information with the investigative agency. As I said, that the fact that she had apparently or allegedly misused her position, these are all in public domain. If you go through the CBI, FIR, everything is there. So what's new? That's the key question. And I completely agree with Mr. Hazare that yes, in public sector, this is how it happens. I mean, typically the MD finds the right kind of person to get things done. And in private sector, you find the modus operandi is slightly different. There's a credit committee, for instance, even in the case of ICICI Chanda Kocchar Saga or the Kochhar gate, there was a credit committee headed by her. But you look at other persons, the profile of the other persons who are in the credit committee. Should they have been there? Did they have the right kind of expertise to be on the committee? Certainly not. And definitely she was not, she did not disclose also the relationship, this particular angle. It was not disclosed by her. What happened in Yes Bank, Rana Kapoor, everything was actually happening in his apartment and at his residence. And then that was officially been granted or with some kind of caveats, etc. Risk factors were created, different weightage were given by the credit committee. And that happened in the bank's headquarters. But actual decisions were taken at his residence, Kapoor's residence. So that's how it happens. But here we need to figure out how tight is the case. That's the problem. Because the CBI's report card is not good. I mean, how many bankers have been convicted? I could think of M. Gopalakrishnan, the Indian Bank chairman in 90s. He was convicted, he was sent to jail. I can think of two other persons. One is Syndicate Bank chairman Sudhir Jain and Archana Bhargav of UBI. Apart from that, I can't think of even Archana Bhargar and Sudhir Jain has not very, I don't remember
Why do
exactly.
you think so, Tamal? So why do you think it's so difficult to find convictions? Is it because, so in this case, for example, like you said, the ED chart sheet, it's a 200 odd page chart sheet, has every detail. They've even gone into detail of how the Kochhars were living in CCI apartments, pretty much paying nothing for years. That apartment was owned by the, Videocon Industries group. And anyone who's in Mumbai knows CCI Apartments is one of the most coveted properties in the city. They finally bought it through Chanda Kochar's trust for 11 lakhs. It cost 5.5 crores. My point is, how do you prove criminality in this? Maybe they were good friends. This was a largesse.
No, that's exactly. So I think the key point is this: our investigative agencies, both ED and CBI, probably they are not exactly well equipped to deal with these financial sector frauds and criminal cases because their record is pretty poor. And the other part is this: if I'm on the other side, I'll tell you, look, Videocon had taken loan from the entire banking system, including ICICI. Now, so do you want to say that they had only had a quid pro quo in ICICI and in other banks' cases they could get everything in a normal course? So how do you prove that? If I am Videocon, I would say that we have got loans from everywhere, including ICICI. So we have not done it. If we have done anything elsewhere, why do you presume that we have done something with ICICI for ICICI getting the loan? The logical course. Don't connect the two. I mean, that will be the argument Videocon would have. But the point that I'm saying, it's pretty. The record of CBI and ED for conviction. Basically for establishing the culpability or the criminality of a banker is pretty poor. So we need to address that. It has to be a watertight. So I'm repeating again, there is no surprise. I'm not shocked, but the surprise is why CBI, right? I mean, the way it has done now after so long. And so is there a new evidence with the investigative agency? And is it a watertight case? That we need to wait and watch.
That, of course, is something the investigative agencies will have to do, the courts will have to look at. I want to go into implications, Hemendra Hazari. What it means for a Chanda Kocchar fall from grace, for the banking industry, Venugopal Dhoot, in this situation today, marquee names in corporate India, and this is where they've come to today. Will there be a cautionary tale?
But definitely, the moment the ICICI Bank sacked her, she has become person non grata in the corporate world. That means she cannot become, independent director, because you have seen, CEOs in other private sector banks or even public sector banks who have proved to be disastrous, but after retirement have got some very choice independent director posts in some blue chip companies. For her, that situation has been completely ruled out ever since she was sacked from the ICICI Bank board, and her arrest will conclusively put a lid on that. I think the implication for this is that in the private sector in particular, you need an institutional mechanism which can monitor, such misconduct of senior officials and even mid-level officials. Because in the PSU banking, you have an institutional structure in the form of the Central Vigilance Commission and to a certain extent even with the CAG. In the private sector, in reality, and definitely at this time, there is really no institutional mechanism where you can report to, against the CEO. And, if it had not been for this random whistleblower, no one would have known about this case at all. So today in the PSU space that includes banking, financial institutions, insurance, there is an advisory board for banking and financial fraud, which takes an independent view when the cases are referred to them. And after doing that investigation, they can recommend for police prosecution. And currently, the Bassi committee has Mr. Bassi, who's an ex-CPC. It has a former police official. So they are quite independently qualified with the necessary experience. And therefore, you don't have these random cases of arrest. So this committee review such cases and then recommend them for prosecution by the police. I would hope to see a similar kind of mechanism being there for the private sector banks, financial institutions, and insurance, because we have seen the gross failure of independent directors, even in the case of ICICI Bank, in taking an independent decision. The board of ICICI Bank steadfastly supported her till
Yeah.
it became untenable.
So what is the role
Cyril
of the
Amarchand.
board here? Because now in hindsight, people say that everyone knew there was some fishy business, the involvement of Deepak Kochhar in, decisions of giving loans, a lot of rumors and whatever it may be. But what should have been the role of the board? How can this be a lesson so that this does not happen again if there was criminal action, which of course a court of law will prove? Let me come to Mr. Hazari first for that.
See, because RBI has now put in another process where you have certain key officials like the chief risk officer, the chief vigilance officer, certain, senior executives who not only will report to the CEO, but they will also have a parallel reporting directly to the board and the board subcommittees like the audit committee, the risk committee, and other such committees. So where they will, if they have any concerns about the CEO, they can always directly report to them. Now, again, in theory, this works very well. But in practice, what happens is senior officials, if they have to report, and expose the CEO, they'll find it very difficult to complain to these independent directors because effectively they also realize that if the news leaks out that it was them who complained, their career is over in
Yeah.
that concerned bank. And that is the private sector, is that if you go up against the CEO, you are sacked. In public sector, you will be given things like, internal audit or send off to the Northeast or Jammu Kashmir or to Chhattisgarh, any of these Naxalite areas. But in the private sector, you are immediately sacked.
Yes.
So this is the lesson. Therefore, they are very cautious when it comes to, reporting complaints against the CEO. And therefore, I would again say it's all the more important that you have a CVC-like mechanism, which I believe, is much maligned by the media and by bankers, but you require such an institutional mechanism in private sector banking because they are dealing with public funds and the independent directors have proven themselves to be incapable of taking up these challenges when it comes, against the CEO of these institutions.
Absolutely. I mean, in this case, the charge is that 1,730 crore rupees was siphoned off in a sense, and the Kochhars cheated ICICI Bank of 1,730 crore rupees in lieu of 64 crore rupees, which could have been a kickback. They've called it profits of crime as per the charge sheet. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, how do you avoid something like this, especially in private sector banks? Do we need a mechanism where this can come to light? Because especially if the perpetrator of the crime is on the top, who will speak out?
No, I think the board needs to act. There has to be accountability of the board, which is the key factor here. If you look at this ICICI case, Mr. Sharma, the chairman of the board, he was going out of his way to defend her. And not only that, Mr. Bhagul, the ex-chairman, he was coming up on television channels and explaining things, how everything is fine and Mrs. Kochhar is absolutely innocent. Until this Sri Krishna committee report came up, everything was fine. The board was completely supporting. What happened to the directors? Have anything happened? I'm not saying that they should be arrested or anything, but what is there? Have they been held accountable? Are we barring them from getting into boards of another banks or any other institutions and all? Not like that. So that's the unfortunate part. If you look at the Banking Regulation Act, Section 10B of Banking Regulation Act talks about corporate governance, etc. And of course the role of the board. But in case of private banks, ultimately the stops at the level of MD and CEO. That's very clear about this particular section of Banking Regulation Act. So I think Reserve Bank of India, which is now much more vigilant than it had been in the past, which bankers are in private talk about micromanagement, RBI is pretty awake of what's happening, and I said more vigilant. But we need to have, it's not only that fit and proper, this term, which has been very used. I don't know whether we actually get into the details of how fit and proper. both the CEO as well as the board of directors, the directors on the board. So there, I would like to believe we need to take a close look at this, not just a right. It's a sort of tick mark. Whether there's any case against you and you have done anything wrong in the past, etc. But I think you have more sophisticated way of psychoanalysis, psychometric test, whatever you call it. Whether you are an entrepreneur or a professional CEO, it doesn't really matter. But everybody, every CEO, and also every board of every director on the board in financial institutions which deal with public money, I think there needs to be a greater level of scrutiny.
Absolutely. We'll have to see whether this leads to a conviction finally and where it goes next as the Kochhars and Venugopal Dhoot enter the legal labyrinth of proving financial crime, which is very difficult actually by the track record to bring to conviction so far. But we'll sit and watch this case. No doubt a shocker. When people who hit the headlines are lauded for their achievements, then get exposed in this manner. Definitely a cautionary tale. Thank you so much, Hemendra Hazari and Tamal Bandyopadhyay, for joining us today.
Thank you.